The stone from the dock sits on my bedside table, alongside Walter's watch and the wooden box of dated lake stones. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I hold it in my hand, feeling its smooth contours, its solid weight. It reminds me of where I've been, of what I've survived, of the strength I didn't know I possessed until it was tested. Theodore remains in prison, his appeals exhausted. I think of him sometimes, this man who thought he could possess my life by stealing it. I wonder if he understands, even now, that what he took, properties, money, years, were just things. The essence of who I am, the love that binds me to my family, the memories that shape my identity, these were always beyond his reach. The cabin is no longer mine, but the memories, the real ones, not the false narrative Theodore created, those will always belong to me. And now, finally, I can share them freely, weaving them into the new story I am creating with each day that passes. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from broken pieces, know that you're not alone. Sometimes the most beautiful mosaics are made from shattered glass, and sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of a different, equally meaningful chapter. My name is Judith Harmon, 68 years old. I never thought it would come to this. That one day my own son, Walter, 42, would look at me with that contempt in his eyes and say, "Get out, I'm done with you," and then drive away, leaving me alone on the side of that road in Greenfield, Massachusetts, with only my purse and the unbearable weight of rejection. It was late October. The leaves were falling like dried tears around me. The cold wind cut through my skin the same way his words had cut through my heart. I was trembling, not just from the cold, but from shock. How did we get here? I wondered as I watched his car disappear around the bend, taking with it 50 years of memories, sacrifices, and love. I still remember the smell of wet earth that day, mixed with the distant aroma of apples from the small agricultural fair nearby. Life's ironies. There, so close, families were celebrating the harvest while I was harvesting nothing but abandonment. That's when a dark blue car stopped beside me. A woman lowered her window. "Are you all right, ma'am?" She had kind, concerned eyes. I hesitated. She was Rebecca Langley, 45. At that moment, I couldn't have imagined how this stranger would change everything. I met Walter in the spring of 1983, when he was born, perfect, his tiny hands gripping my finger as if he would never let go. His father, Harold, 71 now, smiled and said, "He's going to be a good man, Judy." I believed him. For years, I believed. Raising him alone after Harold abandoned us when Walter was only 6 was difficult, but never a burden. I worked double shifts at the local grocery store, saved for his education, and fell asleep so many nights with an aching back, but a heart full of purpose. My son would become somebody. And he did. The first small turning point came when Rebecca, after offering me a ride that fateful day, took me for coffee instead of dropping me at a hotel as I'd asked. "You look like you need a friend more than a hotel room," she said. At Riverside Cafe, the smell of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee created a bubble of calm amid the storm of my life. I told her about the argument with Walter, about how he shouted that I was dead weight in his life now that he had married Veronica, 38. Rebecca listened without judgment. Then she said, "You're staying with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." Her kindness was as unexpected as my son's cruelty. Her house was modest, cozy, with the comforting sound of an old clock marking time in the living room. Through the window, I could see the Connecticut River, dark and unchanging, following its course as life must do regardless of our pain. The second turning point came 3 days later. Walter hadn't called, hadn't cared to know where I was. I was crying silently at night, trying not to disturb Rebecca. That's when she told me about her work as a social worker and offered me a small room at the back of her house. "Temporary," she said, "until you get back on your feet." The next day, we received a visit from Claire Matthews, 65, Rebecca's neighbor and a recent widow. She brought an apple pie and a comforting presence. Something about her reminded me of myself, that kind of strength that comes only after surviving profound losses. When she learned of my situation, she squeezed my hand and said, "I know what it's like to be discarded, too." Days turned into weeks. Fall gave way to winter. Snow covered Greenfield with its silent blanket, muffling sounds, but not my pain. At the local market, I met Margaret Wilson, 72, a retired former teacher who offered me a part-time job at the small community library she managed. "I need someone who understands that books are sanctuaries," she said. I accepted, more from a need to occupy my mind than for the money. The first major turning point happened at Christmas. Walter finally called, not to apologize, but to ask about some family documents he needed for a loan. His voice was cold, practical. When I mentioned I was living with a stranger working at a library, he replied, "See, you can manage on your own. That's what I was saying." As if abandonment had been a favor, a life lesson. That call broke me again. I spent Christmas Eve looking out the window, watching families gather in neighboring houses, lights twinkling, while I felt more invisible than ever. It was Claire who brought me back. She showed up with a small Christmas tree and said, "I've spent many Christmases alone too, but I discovered that loneliness is only unbearable when we don't share it." In January, I discovered by chance that Rebecca had a daughter, Emily, 25. She no longer lived in Greenfield, having moved to Seattle after a fight with her mother. She said I suffocated her life. Rebecca confessed one night, after a few glasses of wine, that my love was a prison. Seeing the pain on her face, I realized we were united by similar abandonments. The difference was that Rebecca was still fighting to win back her daughter, while I had given up. The third turning point came when, at the library, I found a household accounting book from 1995 among old donations. When I opened it, an envelope fell out. Inside was a never-sent letter from Harold to Walter, dated the year my ex-husband left. The words hit me like a slap. "Son, I can no longer live in this lie. Your mother is not the person you think she is. One day, when you're older, I'll tell you the whole truth." Those words reignited an old shame, a secret I thought I had buried deeply. The reason why Harold really left us. The fourth turning point, moderate but devastating, happened when I decided, after weeks of anguish, to show that letter to Claire and Rebecca. Their reactions were different. Claire, with her wisdom of years, said the past should remain in the past. Rebecca, however, insisted that secrets don't heal. They only silently infect. "What did Harold never tell Walter?" Rebecca asked directly, sitting at the kitchen table with the smell of vegetable soup in the air and the distant sound of the night train cutting through the silence. I told the truth for the first time in decades. Before Walter was born, I had an affair with Harold's brother, Edwin. It was brief. Born of loneliness when Harold was constantly traveling for work. I ended everything before I even knew I was pregnant. But the doubt always existed. Was Walter Harold's son or Edwin's? Harold found out years later when Walter was 6, through malicious comments from his own mother, who had noticed the resemblance between the boy and Edwin. He left without confrontation, only with silence and contained anger. "And Walter doesn't know this?" asked Rebecca, horrified. "I never had the courage," I replied. "After Harold left, Edwin also disappeared from our lives. I decided that the truth would only cause more pain." The fifth turning point, moderate and disturbing, came when Margaret, from the library, confided that she knew Walter. He frequently visited Greenfield on business and stopped by the library. "He asked about you last week," she said, causing me deep shock. "He wanted to know if you were okay, but asked me not to tell you he'd asked." My son, who had expelled me from his life, was secretly monitoring my well-being from a distance. What did that mean? Was there hope, or was it just guilt? In March, when the ice began to melt and the first green shoots appeared, I learned that Veronica, Walter's wife, was pregnant. The news came through photos shared on social media, which Claire showed me. I would be a grandmother, but a ghost grandmother. Unknown, erased. The sixth turning point, moderate and painful, happened when I decided to write to Walter, announcing that I would leave Greenfield at the end of spring. I planned to move to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where Rebecca had a sister who could help me start over. In the letter, I didn't mention the past, only wished them happiness for the pregnancy and thanked him for the years I could be his mother. 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected response, not from Walter, but from Veronica. "Judy, Walter doesn't know I'm writing. He hasn't been the same since that day. He cries in secret. He has nightmares. I think you need to talk before it's too late." That letter lit a thread of hope, but also intensified my moral dilemma. Should I leave without looking back or try a reconciliation that could reopen all the wounds? The second major turning point came in the form of a mild heart attack I suffered in April. Nothing serious, but enough to put me in the hospital for a few days. Rebecca, Claire, and Margaret took turns at my side. On my second day there, waking from a nap, I saw Walter sitting beside my bed, looking at me with red eyes. "Veronica told me," he said simply, "about your letter, about the move." Then Margaret called. About the hospital. We sat in silence for long minutes. The sound of medical equipment filled the void between us. Finally, he spoke. "Why did you never fight against me? Why did you accept it when I sent you away?" His question caught me off guard. "Because mothers endure everything for their children," I answered, "even abandonment." He cried then, not like the 42-year-old man he was, but like the boy who once held my hand with such trust. "I didn't really want you to leave that day," he confessed. "I was angry because I discovered something about my father, about you." My heart stopped. The seventh turning point, moderate but devastating, revealed itself. Edwin had contacted Walter months before, telling his version of the story. Distorted, exaggerated, painting me as a manipulator who hid the truth for decades. "He showed DNA tests that prove he's my biological father," said Walter. "Why did you never tell me, Mom?" There, in that hospital room with the smell of disinfectant and pale green walls, the truth I had tried to protect for 42 years finally came to light. I told everything without beating around the bush. The loneliness, the mistake, the fear, the shame. I also explained that I was never absolutely certain, that Harold left before we could confirm anything. The eighth turning point, also moderate, came when Walter revealed that Edwin had terminal cancer and wanted to meet his only son before dying. That's why he sought out Walter, not out of remorse or late love, but as one last act of selfishness disguised as reconciliation. "After I left you on that road," Walter continued, "I went to meet him. He was a bitter stranger who only spoke ill of you and my father, the man who raised me, even if for a short time. I realized I had made a terrible mistake, but I didn't know how to go back." In the days that followed, as I recovered, Walter returned several times. Our conversations were difficult, full of tears and prolonged silences. He oscillated between anger and understanding, between wanting to push me away again and desperately needing the mother he had always known. The third major turning point, the most significant, occurred when Walter invited me to live in his house until the baby was born. Veronica insisted, he said, but his eyes said something else, that he wanted it too. Reconciliation would be slow, painful, imperfect, not a fairy tale happy ending, but an honest new beginning. I returned to Rebecca's house to get my things. She smiled with tears in her eyes. "I always knew this would happen," she said. "You have too much light to stay in the shadows for long." Before leaving, I asked why she had stopped beside me that October day. Why help a stranger in tears on the side of the road? Rebecca then revealed the last and most surprising truth. It wasn't a coincidence. I had been following you and Walter for weeks. Emily, my daughter, asked me to find a woman named Judith Harmon, who had been extraordinarily kind to her during a difficult time in her life. Emily wanted to thank you, but only knew your name and that you lived with your son. My mind flew back to 2 years before when a crying young woman sat beside me on a park bench in Springfield. She was desperate, talking about giving up on everything. I talked with her for hours. I never knew her full name, only that she was called Emily. You saved my daughter that day, Judith. Your words prevented her from doing the worst. When I saw you being abandoned on that road, I knew it was my chance to give back. This revelation showed me the deepest truth. Nothing is coincidence. Every act of kindness creates waves that return in unexpected ways. Every pain has a purpose that only time reveals. Today, 9 months later, I hold in my arms my granddaughter, Elizabeth Judith Harmon, just 2 weeks old. Walter and I still have difficult days, interrupted conversations, wounds that hurt when touched. Veronica has been surprisingly understanding, a bridge between us when words fail. Edwin passed away without seeing us again. Harold, upon learning everything, finally called me after decades of silence. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. His voice, older and tired, said only, "I hope you find peace, Judy." It was enough. Rebecca, Claire, and Margaret remain in my life. Women who rescued me when I no longer had the strength to rescue myself. Emily came to visit last month, now reconciled with her mother. Looking at her, I see how small moments of compassion can transform into mutual salvation. The leaves are falling again in Greenfield, a complete cycle since that day when I found myself alone on the road. The difference is that now I know we are never really alone. Our stories connect in invisible ways. Our mistakes can be necessary steps, and even abandonment can be the beginning of a truer encounter with ourselves and with those we love. I am no longer the same woman who trembled with cold and fear on that road. Pain transformed me. Revealed secrets freed me. The truth, however painful, brought the fresh air my lungs needed to breathe fully again. And when I look at my sleeping granddaughter, I see that even a broken heart can find peace when the truth comes to light. Let me take you back to that October day. The sky was the color of old bruises, and the wind carried the first bite of winter. I stood there, watching my son's taillights disappear around the bend, my fingers clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. In that moment, I wasn't just abandoned, I was erased. 50 years of motherhood reduced to 3 words. I'm done with you. I've asked myself 1,000 times what I did wrong. Was it the casserole I brought to their house last Sunday? The way I suggested Veronica might want to rest more during her pregnancy? Or was it something deeper, a slow poison that had been working through our relationship for years without my noticing? The road stretched empty in both directions. Maple leaves swirled around my ankles like confused memories. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so beautiful while something inside me was dying. The distant church bell struck 4 times. Each chime felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of who I thought I was. A mother, loved, needed, respected. I had no plan. No phone to call a taxi, just my purse with $67, a lipstick the color of faded roses, and a photograph of Walter at his college graduation. His arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling as if the future held nothing but promise. When Rebecca's car slowed beside me, I almost waved her away. What dignity did I have left to preserve? But something in her eyes, a recognition, perhaps, made me pause. Need a ride? She asked, as if finding elderly women abandoned on country roads was an everyday occurrence. I hesitated, my mother's warnings about strangers echoing in my head. But what choice did I have? The sky was darkening, temperature dropping. I nodded and got in. Her car smelled of cinnamon and something else. Books, maybe. The heater hummed quietly. She didn't immediately ask what had happened, and I was grateful for that small mercy. "I'm Rebecca," she said, extending her hand briefly before returning it to the steering wheel. "Rebecca Langley." "Judith Harmon," I replied, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, as if it belonged to someone else. "Where can I take you, Judith?" That simple question undid me. Where could she take me? I had no home anymore. The apartment I'd shared with Walter after Harold left had been sold years ago when Walter insisted I move in with him and Veronica. "It makes no sense for you to live alone, Mom," he'd said. "We have plenty of room." Plenty of room until I became inconvenient. "Is there someone I can call for you?" Rebecca asked when I didn't answer. I shook my head. My friends had dwindled over the years. Some moved away, others passed on. I'd invested everything in Walter, my son, my future, my security. "A hotel, then?" she suggested gently. "Yes," I managed. Any hotel. But she didn't drive to a hotel. Instead, she took me to a small cafe just off Main Street. "I think you need to warm up first," she said, "and maybe talk, or not talk, whatever you need." The cafe windows were fogged with condensation. Inside, the warm light made everything look soft-edged and forgiving. Rebecca ordered us both coffee and a slice of apple pie to share. "I'm a social worker," she said after we'd sat in silence for several minutes. "I've seen a lot of people on their worst days. You don't have to tell me anything, but sometimes it helps to talk to a stranger." The coffee warmed my hands through the ceramic mug. Outside, the first few snowflakes began to fall, earlier than usual for October. I watched them melt against the window and felt something inside me melt too. "My son just left me on that road," I said. The words sounded absurd, like something from a bad movie. "He said he was done with me." Rebecca didn't look shocked or pitying. She just nodded as if she'd heard worse. Maybe she had. "How long had you been living with him?" 3 years, since he married Veronica." I took a sip of coffee. "It was his idea. He said it made sense financially, that I could help with their future children." And what happened today? The pie between us remained untouched. I couldn't eat. My stomach felt like it was filled with those falling leaves, dead and swirling. We had an argument about Veronica. She's pregnant, and I suggested maybe she should rest more, not work so hard. I closed my eyes, remembering. Walter exploded, said I was always criticizing her, that I was jealous of their relationship, that I was dead weight. The last words came out in a whisper. Dead weight. The term people use for something you throw overboard to save a sinking ship. He drove me out to look at the fall colors. That's what he said we were doing. I laughed, a hollow sound. I guess he just wanted a quiet place to dump me. Rebecca reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. Her fingers were warm from the coffee cup. "You'll stay with me tonight," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have a spare room. Tomorrow we can figure out what to do next." I should have refused. Pride demanded it, but pride is a luxury for people who have options. "Thank you," I said. That night in Rebecca's guest room, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her house. The tick of a grandfather clock in the hallway, the occasional creak of settling wood, the distant hum of the refrigerator. Through the window, I could see the Connecticut River, a dark ribbon under the rising moon. I thought about Walter as a baby, how he would only fall asleep if I walked him exactly 27 steps, turned, and walked back, how his little hand would grip my finger, trusting me completely to keep him safe. I thought about his first day of school, how he looked back at me from the classroom door, brave but uncertain. I thought about the day Harold left, how Walter crawled into my bed that night and said, "It's okay, Mom. We don't need him." We don't need him. But apparently, he no longer needed me. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet conversation downstairs. For a moment, I forgot where I was, reaching out as if I might find my familiar bedside table. Instead, my hand met empty air. The clock on the wall said 7:30. I hadn't slept this late in years. At Walter's, I was always up by 5, preparing breakfast, making sure everything was perfect before he and Veronica woke. I found my clothes from yesterday, the only clothes I had, neatly folded on a chair. Someone had washed them. The thought of this kindness from a stranger made my throat tighten. Downstairs, I found Rebecca in the kitchen with an older woman. They both looked up when I entered. "Judith, this is Claire Matthews," Rebecca said, "my neighbor. Claire, this is Judith Harmon." Claire was perhaps in her mid-60s, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and kind eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. She smiled at me, and I noticed the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. They held something I recognized, the shadow of old pain. "Rebecca told me a little about your situation," Claire said. "I brought breakfast. I hope you like blueberry muffins." I sat at the kitchen table, feeling strangely formal in this unfamiliar house with these women I didn't know. The muffins were still warm, the coffee strong and good. Outside, snow continued to fall, dusting the world in white. "Claire lost her husband last year," Rebecca explained, pouring more coffee. She's been helping me with my community outreach work. I'm sorry for your loss, I said automatically. Claire nodded. 3 decades together, and then one day he was gone. Heart attack while gardening. She looked down at her coffee. But at least he didn't choose to leave. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my face flush with shame. At least my son was still alive. At least I had those years with him. What right did I have to feel so broken? Grief is grief, Rebecca said firmly, as if reading my thoughts. Loss is loss. There's no competition. After breakfast, Rebecca showed me her house, a modest colonial with worn but comfortable furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. She'd lived here for 15 years, she told me, ever since her divorce. My daughter, Emily, used to live with me, she said, showing me a photograph of a young woman with Rebecca's eyes and a cautious smile. She's in Seattle now. There was something in her voice when she mentioned her daughter, a careful neutrality that suggested complicated feelings beneath. You must miss her, I said. Rebecca nodded, placing the photograph back on the shelf with deliberate care. Every day. Later that morning, while Rebecca made some work calls, Claire took me shopping. I protested. I had only $67 to my name, but she insisted. Consider it a loan, she said. You can pay me back when you're on your feet again. At the small department store downtown, she helped me select a few basic items: underwear, a pair of jeans, 2 sweaters, toiletries. The normalcy of the activity was both comforting and surreal. 24 hours ago, I had a home, a family, a place in the world. Now I was buying toothpaste with borrowed money. I know what you're thinking, Claire said as we waited in line to pay. How did I get here? What happens next? Will I ever feel normal again? She smiled sadly. The answers are, 1 step at a time, 1 day at a time, and yes, but it will be a different normal. Back at Rebecca's, I tried calling Walter. His phone went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I say? Sorry for whatever I did to make you throw me away? Please take me back? The thought made me sick with shame. 3 days passed. Rebecca went to work each day at the community center, where she counseled families in crisis. The irony wasn't lost on me. Claire came by each afternoon with food or books or simply to sit with me. I tried to make myself useful, cleaning Rebecca's already clean house, organizing her bookshelves by author. On the 4th day, Rebecca came home earlier than usual. She found me staring out the window at the river, watching ice floes drift downstream. I have a proposition for you, she said, sitting beside me on the window seat. The room you're in, it used to be Emily's. Before she left, we converted the sunroom at the back of the house into a small apartment for her. It has its own bathroom and a kitchenette. She paused. It's yours if you want it. Temporarily, of course. Until you figure out your next steps. I turned to look at her, searching for pity in her eyes. I found only practical kindness. Why would you do this for a stranger? I asked. Rebecca looked out at the river for a long moment before answering. Because 17 years ago, I was the one who needed help, and someone gave it to me, no questions asked. She turned back to me. Besides, you're not a stranger anymore. The next day, I moved into the sunroom apartment. It was small but perfect. A twin bed with a patchwork quilt, a comfortable armchair, a tiny kitchenette with a 2-burner stove and mini refrigerator, and a bathroom with a shower. The walls were painted a soft blue, and windows on 3 sides let in the winter light. Emily hated blue, Rebecca said as she helped me settle in. She wanted black, but I drew the line there. I noticed she always spoke of her daughter in this careful way, factual statements that revealed little about their relationship. I didn't pry. We all have our stories, our wounds. That afternoon, Claire brought over a visitor, Margaret Wilson, the retired teacher who ran the small community library. Margaret was tall and angular, with a crown of white curls and bright, intelligent eyes behind round glasses. She reminded me of a curious bird. Rebecca tells me you're looking for work, Margaret said after introductions. The library needs someone 3 days a week. The pay isn't much, but the company is excellent. Mostly books with the occasional human. I hadn't actually said I was looking for work, but I realized I would need income eventually. My Social Security checks, which had been going directly to Walter's account, would need to be redirected. Until then, I had nothing. I don't have much experience with libraries, I admitted. Margaret waved this away. Can you alphabetize? Use a computer for basic searches? Be kind to confused elderly patrons who can't remember what book they're looking for but are sure it had a blue cover? Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Yes to all three. Then you're hired. Start Monday, 9 to 3, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. She stood, smoothing her tweed skirt. And Judith? No one needs to know your circumstances unless you choose to share them. Your dignity is your own. With that, she left as briskly as she had arrived, leaving behind the scent of lavender and the first glimmer of hope I'd felt since Walter drove away. December arrived with more snow and the inescapable approach of Christmas. I started work at the library, finding unexpected solace in the quiet routine of shelving books, helping patrons and listening to Margaret's stories of 50 years of teaching high school English. Books saved me after Richard died, she told me one slow afternoon as we cataloged new arrivals. They're better than people, in some ways. They never leave you unless you leave them first. I redirected my Social Security checks to Rebecca's address and insisted on paying her a modest rent. She tried to refuse, but eventually accepted when I explained that my dignity required it. With careful budgeting, I could afford my small expenses and even set aside a little each month. I still hadn't heard from Walter. Each day of silence was both a wound and a scab, painful, but gradually hardening into something I could bear. I dreamed of him almost nightly, sometimes as the adult who had abandoned me, sometimes as the child who had needed me. I would wake with tears on my face, but a strange, growing resolve in my heart. The week before Christmas, I finally got a call. I was at work when my new prepaid phone rang. My heart leaped when I saw Walter's number on the screen. Hello? My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Mom. Just that one word, flat and emotionless. Walter. I gripped the edge of the circulation desk, grateful the library was empty except for Margaret, who tactfully disappeared into the stacks. I need Dad's birth certificate and the deed to Grandma's house, he said without preamble, for a loan application. No, how are you? No, I'm sorry, just a practical request as if I were a filing cabinet rather than his mother. I don't have those documents, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They were in my things, at your house. A beat of silence. Where are you staying? I almost laughed at the absurdity of the question, as if he had just now wondered what had happened to the mother he'd left on the side of the road nearly 2 months ago. I'm in Greenfield, I said. I have a place to stay. A job at the library. Another silence, longer this time. Then, see? You're managing fine on your own. That's what I was trying to tell you. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath, as if his abandonment had been a favor, tough love to force me into independence. I'll look for the documents in the storage boxes in the garage, he continued, oblivious to the pain he'd just inflicted. If I find them, where should I send them? I gave him the library address, not wanting him to know where I was living. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. Margaret found me there, kneeling on the floor, trying to gather the pieces of the battery that had fallen out. Breathe, Judith, she said, kneeling beside me despite her arthritic knees. Just breathe. That evening, I told Rebecca and Claire about the call. We were sitting in Rebecca's living room, the Christmas tree in the corner sparkling with lights, but doing little to brighten my mood. He treated me like a stranger, I said. No, worse. Like an inconvenient acquaintance. Claire's face darkened with anger. Some people don't deserve the love they're given. Rebecca was more measured. People who hurt others are usually hurting themselves. That doesn't excuse his behavior, but it might explain it. I looked at the tree, remembering all the Christmases with Walter. The year he made me a clay handprint in kindergarten. The year he saved up to buy me a silver necklace with a tiny heart pendant. The year after Harold left, when we made paper chains and popcorn strings and pretended everything was fine. I don't know if I can face Christmas, I admitted. It feels impossible. Claire reached over and took my hand. Then we'll make it possible. Together. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed Greenfield into a scene from a holiday card. Rebecca hosted a small gathering, just the four of us, plus a few of her colleagues from the community center. We ate ham and scalloped potatoes, drank mulled wine, and exchanged modest gifts. No one mentioned Walter or asked about my plans to contact him. It was a kindness I appreciated more than I could express. After everyone left, I sat by the window in my little apartment, watching the snow fall in the glow of the string lights Rebecca had hung around the sunroom windows. Across the street and down the river, I could see families gathered in their homes, their celebrations visible through uncurtained windows, children in pajamas, adults with glasses raised in toasts. The universal tableau of holiday connection. I had never felt more alone. A soft knock at my door roused me from my melancholy. It was Claire, bundled in her coat and boots, a small pine tree in her arms. "I thought you might need this," she said, setting it on my small table. From her pockets, she produced a box of tiny ornaments and a string of battery-operated lights. "Claire, you didn't have to—" "I know." She began arranging the tree. "I've spent 7 Christmases alone since Richard died. The first one, I just sat in the dark and cried. The second, I went to the Bahamas, which was worse because I was still alone. Just alone in the sun." She plugged in the lights, and the tiny tree glowed with warm white light. The third Christmas, I realized something important. Loneliness is only unbearable when we don't share it. She hung a small silver star on the top branch. "So now I share it. With you." We decorated the tree together, and for a little while the ache in my heart subsided. Not gone, but bearable. Shared. January brought bitter cold and the slow return to normal routines after the holidays. I settled into a rhythm. Work at the library 3 days a week, helping Rebecca with her community outreach on Tuesdays. Dinner with Claire on Thursday evenings. I started keeping a journal, recording my thoughts and feelings as I navigated this strange new life. One evening, as Rebecca and I were preparing dinner, I noticed a photograph I hadn't seen before on her refrigerator, Rebecca with her arm around a young woman who must have been Emily, both of them smiling in front of the Space Needle. "Is that recent?" I asked, nodding toward the photo. Rebecca glanced at it, her expression carefully neutral. "Last summer, my first visit to Seattle since she moved." She continued chopping vegetables, her knife moving a little faster. "It was complicated." Something in her tone made me pause. "Rebecca, may I ask what happened between you and Emily? You don't have to tell me, of course." She set down the knife and looked out the kitchen window at the snowy yard. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. "Emily left 3 years ago," she finally said. "She was 22, just finished college. We had a fight, a bad one. She said—" Rebecca's voice caught. "She said I suffocated her, that my love was like a prison, that I never let her make her own mistakes or live her own life." The pain in her voice was so raw, so familiar, that I felt it in my own chest. She packed 2 suitcases and left that night, moved to Seattle because it was as far as she could get from Massachusetts without leaving the country. Rebecca picked up the knife again but didn't resume chopping. She calls on holidays, sends birthday cards, allowed that one visit last year, but she won't come home. I thought of Walter, of the gradual cooling of his affection over the years, the way he consulted me less and less about important decisions, the way he began to treat my advice as interference rather than wisdom. "Our children leave us twice," I said quietly. "Once when they grow up, which is natural, and again when they decide they've outgrown us, which is—" I searched for the word. "Devastating," Rebecca finished. We stood in silence for a moment, 2 mothers united by similar wounds. "The hardest part," Rebecca continued, "is not knowing if I really did something wrong or if this is just life, if all mothers and daughters go through this." I thought of my own mother, gone 20 years now. We'd had our difficulties, our periods of distance, but never this complete rupture. I'd been at her bedside when she died. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know you're one of the most compassionate people I've ever met. Whatever happened between you and Emily, I can't imagine you deserve to be cut out of her life." Rebecca smiled sadly. The same could be said of you and Walter. That night, I dreamed of Walter as a child, lost in a snowy forest calling for me. In the dream, I could hear him, but couldn't find him, my feet heavy and slow as I searched. I woke with tears on my face and a heaviness in my chest that lingered all day. At the library, Margaret noticed my subdued mood. "Bad day?" she asked as we sorted returned books. "Bad dreams," I replied. "About Walter." Margaret nodded, shelving a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with careful hands. Dreams are the mind's way of processing what the heart can't bear in waking hours. "I just wish I understood why," I said, more to myself than to her. "What changed? What did I do wrong?" Margaret gave me a long look over her glasses. "Sometimes it's not what we do, but what was done to us, that shapes how we love and leave." Before I could ask what she meant, the front door chimed and a patron entered, ending our conversation. Later that week, while organizing donations for the library's annual book sale, I came across an old household accounting book from 1995. It was the kind people used before digital banking was common, a simple ledger with neat columns for income and expenses. Out of curiosity, I flipped through it, noting the careful records of a life long past, mortgage payments, grocery bills, birthday gifts purchased. As I turned the pages, an envelope slipped out and fell to the floor. It was yellowed with age, addressed simply to Walter, in a handwriting I recognized immediately. Harold's. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter dated August 15, 1989, the month Harold left us. Walter would have been 6 years old. "Dear Walter," it began, "by the time you're old enough to read this, I will have been gone from your life for many years. I want you to know that leaving wasn't about you. You are, a wonderful boy, and I loved being your father for the time I had with you. But I can't continue living in this lie. Your mother is not the person you think she is. One day, when you're older, I'll tell you the whole truth. Until then, please know that I think of you every day. Love, Dad." I sat down hard on the library stool, the letter clutched in my hand. Harold had never sent this letter. I would have known if Walter had received it. He must have written it in the heat of anger and then thought better of it. But why was it here, in a donated book in Greenfield? The answer came to me slowly. Harold's mother had lived in Greenfield until her death 10 years ago. This must have been her accounting book, donated along with her other possessions when her house was cleared out. She must have kept this letter all these years, evidence of her son's pain, preserved like a poisonous seed. The letter reawakened a shame I'd buried deep inside me for decades. The real reason Harold had left. The secret I'd never told Walter. For days I carried the weight of that letter, unsure what to do. Should I destroy it? Keep it? Show it to Walter? The questions circled in my mind, robbing me of sleep, distracting me during work. Finally, on a snowy evening in late January, I showed the letter to Claire and Rebecca. We were having dinner at Claire's house, a cozy Cape Cod with walls lined with photographs of her children and grandchildren who lived in California and visited rarely. They read it in silence, passing it between them. Rebecca's expression was troubled, Claire's unreadable. "What does he mean? Your mother is not the person you think she is?" Rebecca asked, handing the letter back to me. I took a deep breath. The secret I'd kept for 42 years sat like a stone in my throat. But these women had shown me nothing but kindness. If I couldn't trust them, who could I trust? "Before Walter was born," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "I had an affair with Harold's brother, Edwin." Claire's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't look shocked. Rebecca's expression remained gentle, non-judgmental. "Harold traveled constantly for work back then," I continued, "weeks at a time on the road. I was lonely, isolated in a new town where I knew no one. Edwin was kind to me, attentive in ways Harold hadn't been for years." I stared down at my hands, unable to meet their eyes. "It only happened a few times. I ended it before I even knew I was pregnant. But the timing," I swallowed hard. "The timing meant there was always a question about Walter's biological father. The room was silent except for the ticking of Claire's grandfather clock and the occasional pop from the fireplace. "Harold never knew?" Rebecca asked softly. I shook my head. Not until Walter was 6. Then his mother, the same woman who kept this letter, told him she'd noticed how much Walter resembled Edwin. She'd suspected all along. The cruelty of it still had the power to take my breath away. My mother-in-law, who had never approved of me, who had seen in my son's face a secret I thought was safely buried, who had destroyed her son's marriage with a few carefully chosen words. Harold left the next day. No confrontation, no chance to explain, just gone. I looked up at them, expecting to see judgment in their eyes. Instead, I saw only compassion. Edwin disappeared too. Moved to Arizona, cut contact with all of us. I decided then that the truth would only hurt Walter more. He'd already lost his father. I couldn't bear for him to question his very identity too. Claire reached across the table and took my hand. "You protected your son the best way you knew how." But was it the right choice? I asked. The question that had haunted me for decades. Should I have told him the truth when he was older? Given him the chance to know Edwin, if that's what he wanted? Rebecca sighed. There's rarely a right choice in situations like these. Only different paths, each with their own pain. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. And now, this surfaces. After all these years, it feels like the past is refusing to stay buried. "Perhaps," said Claire, "because it's time for the truth to come to light." The next day at the library, a surprise awaited me. Margaret approached as soon as I arrived, her expression unusually serious. "Judith, there's something I need to tell you," she said, leading me to the small break room at the back of the library. "I've been debating whether I should, but after seeing you yesterday, I think you need to know." My heart quickened. Had something happened to Walter? Had he contacted the library looking for me? "I know your son," Margaret said, confirming my suspicion. "Walter Harmon. He comes to Greenfield regularly for business, something to do with the Regional Hospital Administration. He's been stopping by the library for years." I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. "He comes here? To this library?" Margaret nodded. "About once a month, usually just to use the reference materials or the quiet space to work." She hesitated. "He was here last week, Judith. He asked about you." The room seemed to tilt. "What did he say?" "He asked if you were well, if you seemed happy." Margaret adjusted her glasses nervously. "He made me promise not to tell you he'd asked. But seeing how much you're hurting, I couldn't keep that promise." I tried to make sense of this information. Walter, who had thrown me away like unwanted baggage, was secretly checking on my welfare? It didn't align with the cold, dismissive man who had called asking about documents. "Did he say anything else?" I asked. Margaret shook her head. "Just that he was glad you'd found a place here. Then he left." She touched my shoulder gently. "I'm sorry if I've overstepped, but I thought you should know that whatever happened between you, he still cares enough to ask." The knowledge that Walter was monitoring me from a distance was both comforting and disturbing. Why not contact me directly? Why this strange, secretive concern? That evening, I shared Margaret's revelation with Rebecca. "It makes a kind of sense," she said as we walked along the frozen river, bundled against the February cold. "Pride is a powerful force. Maybe he regrets what he did but doesn't know how to take it back. Or maybe he just feels guilty," I countered. "Checking on me eases his conscience without requiring actual reconciliation." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, watching her breath cloud in the frigid air. "When Emily first left, I used to drive by her apartment in Boston before she moved west, just to see if her lights were on, if her car was there. I never let her see me. I just needed to know she was okay." I thought about this. "But you're her mother. It's natural for you to worry about her welfare." "And you're Walter's mother," Rebecca pointed out. "The relationship goes both ways. Judith, children worry about their parents too, even when they're angry with them." March arrived with the first tentative signs of spring. Longer days, occasional thaws, the return of birds from their winter migrations. I had been in Greenfield for 5 months now, longer than I'd initially planned. My little apartment in Rebecca's sunroom had become home, decorated with thrift store finds and small treasures. A watercolor of the Connecticut River that Claire had painted for me, a set of mismatched teacups I'd collected one by one, a hand-knitted throw from Margaret. I was settling into this new life, finding unexpected contentment in its simplicity and in the friendships that sustained me. The pain of Walter's rejection hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. Less sharp, more of a dull ache that flared occasionally, but didn't consume me. Then came the news that changed everything. Claire burst into the library one afternoon, her silver bob disheveled by the March wind, her cheeks flushed with excitement or agitation. I couldn't tell which. "Judith," she said, slightly breathless, "I need to show you something." She pulled me to a quiet corner and took out her tablet. After a few taps, she turned the screen toward me. It showed a social media page, Veronica's, I realized. And there, posted just hours earlier, was a sonogram image with the caption, "Baby Harmon coming in August. Walter and I couldn't be more excited to meet you." I stared at the grainy black and white image, my heart performing a complex dance of joy and sorrow. A grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. But would I ever meet this child? Would I be allowed to hold them, to see Walter's eyes or smile reflected in a new generation? "I thought you should know," Claire said gently. "I follow her because my niece went to college with her. I hope I didn't—" "No," I interrupted, still staring at the image. "Thank you for telling me." I touched the screen lightly, as if I could reach through it to touch this new life. At least now I know. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small apartment, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. Should I contact Walter? Congratulate him? Would that be seen as an intrusion? Or worse, would he think I was trying to use the baby as leverage to re-enter his life? By morning, I had made a decision. I would write to him. Not an email or text that could be easily ignored, but an actual letter. I would tell him I was leaving Greenfield at the end of spring, moving to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where Rebecca's sister had offered to help me find an apartment and a job. I would wish him well with the baby and thank him for the years I'd been privileged to be his mother. No guilt, no recriminations, just goodbye. It took me 3 days to write the letter, each draft more difficult than the last. In the final version, I made no mention of Harold's letter or the questions about Edwin. Those were burdens I would carry alone. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday, the first truly spring-like day of the year. The trees were still bare, but there was a softness in the air, a promise of renewal. As I walked back from the post office, I felt lighter somehow, as if the letter had carried away some of the weight I'd been carrying. 2 weeks passed with no response. I hadn't really expected one, but still, each day of silence was a small disappointment. I began making preparations for my move to Portsmouth, scheduled for the end of May. Rebecca's sister, Janet, had found me a small apartment above a bookstore and a part-time job at a local senior center. It wasn't much, but it was a fresh start. Then, on a rainy April morning, a letter arrived. Not from Walter, but from Veronica. My hands shook as I opened it. "Dear Judith," it began in neat, careful handwriting. "Walter doesn't know I'm writing to you. He received your letter last week and hasn't been the same since. He reads it at night when he thinks I'm asleep. I've heard him crying in the shower. He has nightmares where he calls out for you. I don't know exactly what happened between you two. Walter won't talk about that day, just says it was necessary. But I know my husband, and he's not the same man. There's a darkness in him now, a regret he won't acknowledge. I think you need to talk before it's too late, before the baby comes, before you move away, before this rift becomes permanent. I'm not asking for me. I'm asking for Walter and for our child, who deserves to know their grandmother. Please consider reaching out one more time. Sometimes pride keeps us from healing the wounds we ourselves have created. Sincerely, Veronica." I read the letter 3 times, trying to understand what it meant. Walter was suffering? Regretting his actions? It didn't align with the cold, dismissive man who had abandoned me, who had called only to ask about documents. This letter complicated everything. I'd been preparing myself for a clean break, a new beginning in Portsmouth. Now I was being pulled back into the emotional tangle I'd been trying to escape. Should I reach out as Veronica suggested, risk another rejection, or should I continue with my plans, accepting that some relationships cannot be mended? I shared the letter with Rebecca that evening. She read it thoughtfully, her expression giving nothing away. "What do you think?" I asked when she finished. Rebecca folded the letter carefully before responding. "I think," she said slowly, "that healing is rarely linear. Sometimes we have to circle back to move forward." "You think I should contact him?" "I think you should listen to your heart. What does it tell you?" I closed my eyes, trying to hear past the noise of fear and pride, that I miss my son, that I want to know my grandchild, that I'm afraid of being hurt again. Rebecca nodded. "All valid feelings. The question is, which would you regret more, trying and failing or not trying?" At all? I didn't have an answer that night, or the next. The question followed me through my days at the library, my evenings with Claire, my quiet mornings watching the river from my window. Then, in the 3rd week of April, the decision was made for me. I was shelving books when a sharp pain gripped my chest, radiating down my left arm. The room tilted, books sliding from my hands as I reached for the shelf to steady myself. I heard Margaret's voice, distant and alarmed. "Judith? Judith!" Then darkness. I woke in the hospital, the steady beep of monitors and the antiseptic smell telling me where I was before I even opened my eyes. A mild heart attack, the doctor told me. Not life-threatening, but a warning. I would need to stay for observation for a few days, make some lifestyle changes, take medication. Rebecca, Claire, and Margaret took turns sitting with me, bringing books, flowers, and quiet company. I was touched by their devotion, these women who had become my family in the space of a few months. On my 2nd day there, I woke from an afternoon nap to find not Rebecca or Claire, but Walter sitting beside my bed. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. His presence seemed so improbable, so longed for, that my mind must have conjured him. But then he spoke, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't used it in some time. "Veronica told me," he said simply, "about your letter, about Portsmouth." Then Margaret called about the hospital. I struggled to sit up, wincing at the pull in my chest. Walter didn't move to help me, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor counted the seconds between us. I drank in the sight of him, thinner than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and mouth. He looked exhausted, haunted. Finally, he spoke again, his voice barely audible over the hospital sounds. "Why did you never fight against me? Why did you accept it when I sent you away?" The question caught me off guard. Of all the things he might have said, this was unexpected. "Because mothers endure everything for their children," I answered honestly. "Even abandonment." His face crumpled then, not in anger, but in a grief so raw it took my breath away. He cried silently, shoulders shaking, face buried in his hands. Not like the 42-year-old man he was, but like the boy who had crawled into my bed the night his father left, seeking comfort from the one parent who remained. I wanted to reach for him, to stroke his hair as I had when he was small, but something held me back. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the memory of his cold dismissal on that October day. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "I didn't really want you to leave that day," he confessed. I was angry, confused. I'd discovered something about Dad, about you. My heart stuttered, the monitor beside me registering the change with a quickened beep. "What do you mean?" Walter took a deep breath. "Edwin contacted me last summer, my uncle, Dad's brother." He watched my face carefully as he spoke. He told me things about you and him, about who my father really is. The room seemed to shrink around me, the air thinning until it was hard to breathe. The secret I'd kept for 42 years, the truth I'd protected Walter from, had found him anyway. He showed me DNA tests, Walter continued, his voice flat, tests that prove he's my biological father. Why didn't you ever tell me, Mom? In that hospital room with its pale green walls and harsh fluorescent lighting, the past finally caught up with me. There was nowhere left to hide, no way to protect either of us from the truth. So I told him everything. The loneliness of those early years with Harold, the brief comfort I'd found with Edwin, the uncertainty about Walter's paternity, Harold's discovery and departure, my decision to shield Walter from a truth that could only hurt him. I thought I was protecting you, I finished, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't bear for you to question your place in the world, your identity. Walter listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he was silent for so long that I began to fear he would simply walk out, leave me again with no resolution. Instead, he said, Edwin is dying. Cancer. Terminal. That's why he reached out. He wanted to meet his only son before he died. Walter's mouth twisted bitterly around the words. Not because he regretted abandoning us, not because he loved me or even wanted to know me, but because he wanted to clear his conscience before meeting his maker. I closed my eyes, absorbing this new information. Edwin dying. The man who had been a brief comfort in my loneliness, who had then disappeared from our lives, was now reaching from the past to disrupt the present. After I left you on that road, Walter continued, I drove straight to Edwin's hotel. He was staying in Springfield for treatments at the medical center there. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Harold's that my heart ached. I thought I wanted answers, validation. Instead, I found a bitter old man who spent 2 hours disparaging you and Dad, the man who raised me, however briefly. Walter looked at me directly then, his eyes, Harold's eyes I'd always thought, full of confusion and pain. I realized I'd made a terrible mistake, that I'd thrown away the one parent who had always been there for me, based on the word of a stranger who shared my DNA but nothing else. He swallowed hard, but by then, I didn't know how to take it back, how to find you, how to admit I was wrong. Margaret told me you'd been asking about me at the library, I said. He nodded, looking slightly ashamed. I couldn't stay away completely. I needed to know you were okay. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She said you were becoming indispensable there. Hardly, I demurred, but I do enjoy the work. Another silence fell between us, less tense than before, but still fragile, uncertain. Veronica's pregnant, he said finally. I know. Claire showed me the announcement. A girl due in August, he hesitated. We're naming her Elizabeth, after Veronica's grandmother. That's lovely, I said, meaning it. Elizabeth. I would have a granddaughter named Elizabeth. Walter shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. Veronica wants... That is, we both think. He took a deep breath. Would you consider staying with us? Until the baby comes? We have the guest room, your old room. The offer hung in the air between us, unexpected and complicated. Was this guilt? Obligation? Or a genuine desire to repair what had been broken? Walter, I began carefully, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure it's wise to simply pick up where we left off, as if nothing happened. He nodded, looking down at his hands. I understand. It was just a thought. I studied his downcast face, seeing in it echoes of the little boy who had been so devastated by his father's departure. Perhaps, I suggested, we could start smaller. Dinner once I'm out of here. Conversations. Rebuilding slowly. He looked up, relief evident in his eyes. I'd like that. When Walter left an hour later, promising to return the next day, I felt both exhausted and strangely energized. Nothing had been fully resolved. The hurt remained, the trust broken. But a door had opened. A possibility of reconciliation that hadn't existed before. Rebecca arrived shortly after, bearing fresh flowers and a concerned expression. Margaret told me Walter was here, she said, arranging the daisies in a vase beside my bed. How did it go? I told her about our conversation, about Edwin's revelation and Walter's invitation. "What will you do?" she asked when I finished. I looked out the window at the April sky where patches of blue were visible between drifting clouds. "I'm not sure yet, but I think I might stay in Greenfield a little longer." Rebecca smiled, taking my hand. "I always knew you would. You have too much light to stay in the shadows for long." I was released from the hospital 3 days later with prescriptions and instructions for cardiac rehabilitation. Walter had visited each day, our conversations gradually becoming less strained, though still careful, measured. We were like people learning a new language, searching for words that wouldn't wound. Rebecca drove me home, fussing over me in a way that would have annoyed me from anyone else, but felt like love from her. As we pulled into her driveway, I noticed fresh flowers in the window boxes of my sunroom apartment. Claire's doing, no doubt. "Before we go in," I said, turning to Rebecca, "there's something I've been wondering. Why did you stop for me that day? On the road? Why help a crying stranger?" Rebecca turned off the engine and was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned to me with a small, enigmatic smile. "It wasn't exactly a coincidence, Judith." I frowned, not understanding. "I had been looking for you," she continued. "For weeks, actually. Emily asked me to find a woman named Judith Harmon, a kind woman who had shown extraordinary compassion to her during a difficult time. Emily only knew your name and that you lived with your son somewhere in western Massachusetts." My mind raced, trying to place when I might have met Rebecca's daughter. "I don't understand. I've never met Emily." 2 years ago, Rebecca said, Emily was in a very dark place. She had just dropped out of graduate school, broken up with her fiancé, and was contemplating, she swallowed hard, ending her life. She sat on a park bench in Springfield, crying, when an older woman sat beside her and simply started talking to her, for hours, about life and pain and resilience. A memory stirred. A young woman with red-rimmed eyes on a bench in Forest Park. I had been waiting for Walter, who was attending a conference at the medical center nearby. The girl had looked so lost, so much like I had felt after Harold left, that I couldn't walk past. "That was Emily?" I whispered. Rebecca nodded. "She never knew your full name, just that you were Judith and lived with your son. She said you saved her life that day. Your words, your compassion." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "When she finally called me, after months of silence, she asked me to find you, to thank you." I sat back, stunned by this revelation. "So when you saw me on the road, I recognized you from Emily's description. And then, when I heard what had happened," Rebecca shrugged. "It felt like more than coincidence. It felt like purpose." That night, alone in my apartment, I thought about the strange symmetry of it all, how a moment of kindness toward a stranger had somehow circled back to save me in my own moment of need, how Rebecca had been searching for me even as I was being cast adrift, how nothing, not a single word or gesture, is ever truly lost. The next few weeks brought a cautious rapprochement with Walter. We met for coffee, for lunch, for walks along the river as spring gradually transformed Greenfield. Our conversations were sometimes stilted, sometimes surprisingly easy, as we navigated the new terrain of our relationship. Veronica joined us occasionally, her pregnancy now visible beneath flowing tops. She was warm, conciliatory, clearly wanting peace between her husband and me. I found myself liking her more than I had before, seeing in her not a rival for Walter's affection, but an ally in healing our fractured family. Edwin died in early May without seeing Walter again. My son told me this over dinner at a small Italian restaurant, his voice carefully neutral. He asked to see me again. At the end, I couldn't do it. I nodded, understanding. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. "Do you think I made the wrong choice?" he asked, vulnerability evident in his voice. "I think you made the only choice you could," I replied. Just as I did, all those years ago. A few days later, I received an unexpected phone call. Harold, my ex-husband, silent for decades, was suddenly on the line, his voice older, rougher, but still recognizable. "Judy," he said, The old nickname strange to my ears after so long. Walter called me. Told me everything. About Edwin. About you two reconnecting. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. Harold, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. He sounded tired, resigned. It was a long time ago. We were different people then. Yes, I agreed. We were. I should have confronted you, he continued, given you a chance to explain. Instead, I just ran, left you to raise our son alone. Our son? Not your son or Edwin's son, but our son. The simple pronoun brought tears to my eyes. Walter says he's going to be a father, Harold said after a moment, that I'm going to be a grandfather. Yes, a little girl, Elizabeth. Harold was quiet for a long moment, then, I hope you find peace, Judy. I really do. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, not reconciliation, but it was something. An acknowledgement, an ending that felt less jagged than the one we'd had before. The final turning point came in late May, just as the trees were fully leafed out and the days were stretching long and golden. Walter and Veronica invited me to dinner at their home, the first time I'd been back since that October day. Walking up the familiar driveway was harder than I'd expected. Memories assaulted me, bringing in groceries, planting the rose bushes that now bloomed along the front walk, watching from the window for Walter's car each evening. Veronica met me at the door, her smile warm, her belly now prominently rounded beneath a flowing dress. Judith, she said, taking my hands in hers, we're so glad you came. Walter appeared behind her, looking nervous but determined. Mom, he said simply, the word both an acknowledgement and an olive branch. Dinner was pleasant, if slightly awkward, the three of us carefully navigating around the elephant in the room, the memory of my unceremonious ejection from this very house. After dessert, Walter cleared his throat. Mom, Veronica and I have been talking. About the baby, about the future. He glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. We'd like you to move back in with us. Not in the guest room, but in the apartment over the garage. We've been renovating it. Private entrance, kitchen, everything you'd need. You'd have your independence, but you'd be close. For the baby, for us. I looked between them, searching their faces for signs of reluctance or obligation. I found only sincerity, hope, and perhaps a touch of nervousness. That's very generous, I said carefully. But are you sure? Both of you? It was my idea, Veronica admitted. I never had a grandmother growing up. I want Elizabeth to have that relationship. She placed a hand on her belly. Besides, I could use the help and wisdom of someone who's done this before. I thought about Rebecca's sunroom, which had become a sanctuary to me, about Claire and Margaret, who had become dear friends, about the library where I'd found purpose and community. Could I leave all that to return to a place that held such painful memories? I need to think about it, I said finally. It's a big decision. Walter nodded, looking disappointed but understanding. Of course. Take all the time you need. That night, I shared the offer with Rebecca as we sat on her porch, watching fireflies rise from the darkening lawn. What do you think? I asked her. Rebecca considered for a long moment, rocking gently in her chair. I think, she said finally, that second chances are rare and precious things. But what if it doesn't work? What if the same problems resurface? Then you'll handle it differently this time. You're not the same woman who was left on that road, Judith. You're stronger now, clearer about who you are and what you deserve. I thought about that, about how the past 7 months had changed me, how I'd gone from a woman defined solely by her role as mother to a woman with friends, work, purpose beyond family, how I'd survived the worst thing I could imagine, rejection by my only child, and found that life continued, that joy was still possible. I'll miss you, I admitted. You and Claire and Margaret, the library, this place. Rebecca smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. Greenfield isn't going anywhere. Neither are we. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Besides, I have a feeling you'll be back often. Some friendships transcend distance. 2 weeks later, I moved into the apartment over Walter and Veronica's garage. It was lovely. Freshly painted in soft blues and creams, with new furniture and large windows that let in the summer light. Walter had hung some of my old paintings on the walls and placed my favorite reading chair by the window. Small touches that said, "This is yours. You belong here." Reconciliation wasn't immediate or perfect. There were awkward moments, old patterns that threatened to resurface. Walter and I still had difficult conversations, still navigated the new boundaries of our relationship, but there was a fundamental difference now: honesty. The secrets that had poisoned our family for generations were finally in the open, allowing us to build something new on a foundation of truth rather than silence. Elizabeth Judith Harmon was born on a hot August morning, 7 pounds, 6 ounces of perfection, with Walter's chin and Veronica's eyes. When they placed her in my arms for the first time, I felt a circle closing. Life continuing despite our human dramas, love persisting despite our human failings. Rebecca, Claire, and Margaret came to visit a week after Elizabeth's birth, bearing gifts and exclaiming over the baby's perfection. Watching them coo over my granddaughter, I realized that family isn't just about blood or history. It's about who stays, who sees you at your worst and loves you anyway, who helps you rebuild when everything has crumbled. Emily came to visit the following month, now reconciled with her mother. Seeing them together, tentative but trying, both changed by their time apart, gave me hope for all broken relationships. Looking at Emily, now a poised young woman rather than the desperate girl on that park bench, I marveled at how our lives had intersected, how a simple act of kindness had rippled outward in ways I could never have imagined. The leaves are falling again in western Massachusetts, their brilliant colors a reminder of nature's cycles of death and renewal. A year has passed since that October day when Walter left me on the roadside, a year of loss and discovery, pain and healing, endings and beginnings. I am not the same woman who stood trembling in the cold, watching her son drive away. That woman defined herself solely through others, as Harold's wife, as Walter's mother. She measured her worth by her usefulness to those she loved. The woman I am now understands that love doesn't require erasure of self, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, that family, both born and chosen, is complex and imperfect but worth fighting for. As I rock Elizabeth to sleep in the quiet of the afternoon, watching the same leaves fall that were falling when my world collapsed, I think about the strange geometry of life, how we circle back to where we started, but never quite the same place, because we ourselves have changed. I think about Harold, who called last week to ask if he might visit his granddaughter someday, about Walter, who still has moments of distance but is trying every day to rebuild what was broken, about Veronica, who has become not just a daughter-in-law but a friend. I think about Rebecca and Claire and Margaret, who saved me when I couldn't save myself, about Emily, whose life intersected with mine at exactly the right moment for both of us. And I think about secrets, how they fester in darkness but lose their power in the light, how truth, however painful, is the only soil in which genuine love can grow. The past year has taught me that nothing is permanent, not abandonment, not pain, not even the identities we build for ourselves. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways, offering second chances when we least expect them. Elizabeth stirs in my arms, her tiny hand reaching up to touch my face. In her eyes, I see the future, unknown, unwritten, full of possibility. In her perfect innocence, I see hope for all of us who have made mistakes, who have hurt and been hurt, who have lost our way and found it again. I am Judith Harmon, 69 years old, mother, grandmother, friend, once abandoned, now found, once broken, now healing. My story isn't over yet. None of our stories are, as long as we have the courage to turn the page and begin again. Have you ever found yourself completely alone, abandoned by someone you thought would never leave you? In those darkest moments, it's hard to believe that anything good can grow from such painful soil. Yet somehow, life finds a way to surprise us with new beginnings, doesn't it? The seasons continue to change in Greenfield. Winter will come again, then spring, in the eternal cycle that pays no attention to human drama. Elizabeth is crawling now, exploring her world with fearless curiosity. Walter and I have settled into a new kind of relationship. Not the unquestioning closeness we once had, but something more honest, more equal. We are learning to see each other as we truly are, not as we wish the other to be. Veronica has returned to work part-time, grateful for my help with Elizabeth. Sometimes I catch her watching Walter and me with a look of satisfaction, as if she's pleased with the reconciliation she helped engineer. She was wiser than either of us, seeing what we needed when we were too hurt and proud to see it ourselves. Rebecca calls weekly, and I visit Greenfield often. For lunch with Claire, for shifts at the library where Margaret still insists they can't manage without me, for evening walks along the river that witnessed my darkest days and my slow rebirth. Edwin's absence is a complicated hole in our family narrative. Neither Walter nor I mourn him exactly, yet his existence, his choices, shaped both our lives in ways we're still discovering. Walter sometimes asks questions about him, trying to piece together the man who contributed to his genetic makeup, but nothing to his character. I answer as honestly as I can, neither demonizing nor idealizing, simply telling the truth as I knew it. Harold came to visit in October, tentative and awkward, but determined to meet his granddaughter. He's older now, softer in some ways, his anger long since burned out. Watching him hold Elizabeth, I felt no bitterness, only a gentle sadness for all we had lost and could never recover. Some bridges, once burned, can only be replaced, not rebuilt. What Harold and I have now isn't our old connection, but a new, fragile construction. A grandparent's truce for the sake of the next generation. Last week, Walter found me looking through old photographs, images of him as a baby, as a toddler holding my hand as a serious first grader with a missing front tooth. He sat beside me, our shoulders touching lightly. "I look like him in this one," he said, pointing to a picture of himself at about 10. "Like Edwin." I studied the photograph. "Yes," I agreed, around the eyes. "But your smile, that was always your father's, Harold's." Walter was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking a lot about fatherhood, about what makes someone a father." He looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "DNA isn't enough, is it?" "No," I said softly. "It's a starting point, nothing more. Being a parent is about showing up day after day, about loving even when it's difficult, about putting someone else's needs before your own." He nodded, looking back at the photographs. "I want to be a good father to Elizabeth, like Dad was to me, for those first 6 years, like you were, always." The simple acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. After all the pain, the rejection, the difficult road back to each other, to hear him recognize the love that had always been there, it felt like a blessing I hadn't known I was waiting for. "You already are," I told him. "You already are." As I look back on the past year, I'm struck by how often salvation comes from unexpected sources. How Rebecca, a stranger, became my lifeline. How Claire and Margaret, women I might never have met in my previous life, became essential to my healing. How Veronica, whom I once viewed with unnecessary suspicion, became an ally and friend. I think about the letter that started it all. Harold's never-sent accusation, preserved by his mother and discovered by chance. How that painful truth, finally exposed to light, began a chain reaction that ultimately led to healing rather than further destruction. And I think about Emily, the young woman on the bench whose life intersected with mine at exactly the right moment for both of us. How my simple act of stopping, of listening, rippled outward in ways I could never have imagined, eventually circling back to save me when I most needed saving. There's a pattern here, a geometry to life that only becomes visible with time and distance. The connections between us, the invisible threads that bind stranger to stranger, pain to healing, ending to beginning, they form a web more intricate and beautiful than we can comprehend in the moment. Elizabeth is learning to stand now, pulling herself up on furniture, her face a study in concentration and delight. Watching her, I'm reminded that we all fall many times before we learn to walk steadily, that progress isn't linear, but a series of attempts, failures, and renewed efforts. My relationship with Walter continues to evolve, some days easier than others, some conversations still careful, some wounds still tender when touched. But we are moving forward, one day at a time, with an honesty we never had before. I no longer fear being cast aside again, not because I trust that it won't happen, but because I know now that I would survive it, that I am more than my role as mother or grandmother, that I have within me the resilience to begin again, to find joy and purpose, even in the most unexpected circumstances. The truth about Edwin, about Harold, about my own mistakes, no longer feels like a weight I must carry alone. Shared, it has become lighter, less powerful. The secrecy was more damaging than the facts themselves ever could be. As winter approaches again, I find myself thinking of that October's day when everything fell apart. The memory no longer carries the sharp pain it once did. Instead, I see it now as a necessary breaking. Painful, yes, but creating space for something new to grow. When I look at my sleeping granddaughter, I see hope, not just for her future, but for all of us who have loved and lost, who have made mistakes and sought forgiveness, who have been broken and found a way to become whole again. Life rarely gives us neat endings or perfect resolutions. Instead, it offers us moments of grace amid the messiness, glimpses of beauty amid the pain, opportunities for connection when we feel most alone. I am Judith Harmon, 69 years old, once abandoned on a roadside, now surrounded by love both old and new. My story continues to unfold in ways I could never have predicted, teaching me that even a heart broken by rejection can find its way to peace when the truth finally comes to light. Do you believe that every ending, no matter how painful, contains the seeds of a new beginning? I've come to think that perhaps our greatest wounds can become our most unexpected gifts, if we have the courage to keep our hearts open even after they've been broken. This isn't your place anymore, Mom. It's time you accept that. My son's words echoed through the kitchen I'd designed myself 42 years ago. The coffee I'd just brewed sat untouched between us, steam rising like the anger in his voice. Through the open window, the old oak trees in the yard stood silent, witnesses to everything I'd endured in this house. My name is Eleanor Barrett. I'm 68 years old with calloused hands that have built more than most people could imagine. The autumn breeze in Asheville had always brought me peace, until that September morning when Walter, my 43-year-old son, walked through the door of the house I'd raised with my own hands and shouted words I never thought I'd hear. His wife Rebecca stood behind him, 41 years old and unable to meet my eyes. My grandchildren, 15-year-old Abigail and 12-year-old Connor, watched from the hallway, confused and frightened. They'd never seen their father like this. Neither had I. Let me tell you what led to this moment. I remember the day Gerald and I bought this land in Montford. Back then, it was just an overgrown lot with potential that only we could see. The neighborhood wasn't fashionable yet, just working families trying to make something of themselves. Gerald had his accounting job, and I worked at the textile factory on the edge of town. We were young, in love, and determined. The wooden house with its wraparound porch and rose garden holds 42 years of memories. Every floorboard knows my footsteps. In recent months, Walter had been insisting I should move to somewhere more suitable for someone your age, a euphemism for a nursing home, but I'd always gently refused. That morning, though, he brought a folder of papers, a power of attorney I'd signed 2 years earlier, during my bout with pneumonia. I didn't remember the document. Age plays tricks on your memory sometimes. "We signed everything yesterday," he said, placing the papers on the kitchen table. "The house has been sold. You're moving to Golden Pines in 2 weeks." I felt the floor disappear beneath me. My house sold without my consent? The home I built with Gerald? The land we purchased when nobody believed in this neighborhood? Rebecca finally spoke, her voice hesitant. "Eleanor, it's for your own good. The house is too big. There are stairs, and you're alone." Alone. The word echoed like a sentence. After 42 years of caring for others, I was now a burden. Abigail, always sensitive, asked from the doorway, "Is Grandma leaving?" Walter answered before I could open my mouth. Grandma's going to a better place where she'll have friends her own age. In that moment, something inside me, something that had remained dormant since Gerald's death, awakened. I set my coffee cup down on the table and said, in the calmest voice I could muster, "I want to show you something." I walked toward the basement. They all followed, puzzled. The basement had always been my private space, where I kept the past. I turned on the light and pointed to an old wooden box in the corner. I asked Walter to open it.